Since 1974, Atlantic Records has been one of the biggest music labels that's ever operated. Given the experience they have, they know how to finesse and trick young artists. NBA Youngboy, a kid from one of America's most dangerous cities at 17, signed what looks like a life-changing record deal worth millions. Fast forward 5 years, and that same artist has generated over $300 million in revenue for his label while barely seeing a fraction of it himself.
NBA Youngboy, why do they tell that young man, and I'm getting from the source like the guys, I'm talking to even sometimes their lawyers.
When he dared to speak out, calling his own record deal slavery, the industry machine turned against him and made an example out of him. This isn't just another sob story about a rapper getting a bad deal. This is about NBA Youngboy, one of the most streamed artists in hip-hop history, and how Atlantic Records systematically trapped, exploited, and then tried to destroy his career when he refused to stay quiet about their predatory practices. We're talking about a young man who should be worth hundreds of millions based on his streaming numbers alone.
Why did Atlantic basically tell Youngboy, listen, after 22 albums that you dropped in a time period where we only contracted you to do 5, hey, we'll negotiate and give you this amount of money, but we ain't giving you a mother part of your masters back.
But instead found himself fighting for basic financial freedom while corporate executives got rich off his pain. And when he finally broke free, Atlantic offered him $25 million to come back, proving they knew exactly how much they had been stealing from him all along. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how major record labels operate their modern-day plantation system, why speaking truth to power in the music industry can get you blacklisted faster than you can say streaming royalties, and how one artist's refusal to be silenced is changing the entire game for future generations.
When Youngboy started, he's 17, he's 22 now. You don't understand what the fuck going on. He's just putting out music. It took a team to be around him. Now he just started, and that's why he loves Birdman so much, even though,
So if you want to understand the real economics behind those million-dollar record deals you see in the headlines, if you want to know why your favorite artists stay broke while their labels get rich, and if you want to see how the music industry's power structure is finally starting to crack, you need to stick around until the very end of this documentary. What's good? It's your boy Hip Hop History, and today we're diving into one of the most important stories in modern hip hop, not just because of what happened, but because of what it reveals about how this entire industry really works. NBA Youngboy's story matters because he did something most artists are too afraid to do. He pulled back the curtain and showed everyone exactly how the machine operates, and for that act of transparency, he paid a price that reveals just how ruthless this industry can be when artists step out of line.
NBA Youngboy was an artist who got a suspended 10-year sentence for being in the drive-by. He not thinking about, well, this is what a music contract looks like, this is how I should do it. No, he's just, I'm in here.
Kentrell Deshaun Gaulden was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1999. If you're not familiar with Baton Rouge, this is consistently ranked as one of the most dangerous cities in America. We're talking about a place where the murder rate is nearly 10 times the national average, where poverty isn't just a statistic, it's a way of life. Youngboy's childhood was marked by instability from day one. His father was sentenced to 55 years in prison when Kentrell was just a baby. His mother struggled with addiction issues, leaving him to be raised primarily by his grandmother. By elementary school, he was already moving between different family members' homes, never having that stable foundation most kids take for granted. Youngboy wasn't just poor, he was survival mode poor.
They smile up in my face, but they don't know what I've been through. Whole lot of nights I went to sleep and I ain't had no food. Thanks to my mom and my grandfather, I always had a roof over my head.
We're talking about a kid who sometimes didn't know where his next meal was coming from, who watched his neighborhood get consumed by violence, who saw friends and family members either end up dead or locked up before they turned 20. In Baton Rouge's North Side, there are essentially 3 paths for young black men: sports, music, or the streets. For a kid who wasn't built for athletics, music became his lifeline. He started writing rhymes as a way to process the trauma he was experiencing daily. By age 14, Youngboy had dropped out of school.
Are you still in school?
Nope.
Dropped out?
Yep, I got a dream to chase.
He was trying to help support his family, navigating a dangerous environment where going to school could literally get you killed, and already showing serious talent as a rapper. The streets called, and Youngboy got caught up in some of this lifestyle, which led to him being placed in a detention center when he was just 15. While locked up, he didn't sit around feeling sorry for himself. He used that time to focus entirely on his music, writing constantly and building the incredible work ethic that would later make him one of the most prolific artists in hip-hop. When he got out, he was more determined than ever to make music his way out of poverty. He started recording in makeshift studios, often using basic equipment in friends' bedrooms. The quality wasn't professional, but the raw emotion and authenticity in his voice was undeniable. His early mixtapes, Life Before Fame and Mind of a Menace, weren't just music releases, they were audio documentaries of life in one of America's most forgotten communities. Youngboy was rapping about real experiences with emotional honesty that was rare even in hip-hop. By 2016, his YouTube numbers were climbing. Songs like 38 Baby and Untouchable were getting hundreds of thousands of views organically. This wasn't manufactured hype. This was genuine grassroots support from fans who connected with his story. But here's the thing about being an independent artist from Baton Rouge. You can have all the talent in the world, but without industry connections, proper distribution, and marketing budgets, there's a ceiling to how far you can go. Youngboy was hitting that ceiling by early 2017. That's when the vultures started circling. Record labels began reaching out, promising him the world, offering amounts of money that seemed impossible to a kid who had grown up with nothing. Leading the charge was Atlantic Records, one of the most powerful labels in the industry. To a 17-year-old kid from Baton Rouge who had been sleeping on couches and wondering where his next meal was coming from, Atlantic's offer must have looked like divine intervention. Atlantic Records isn't just a music company. They're a subsidiary of Warner Music Group, one of the big three record label conglomerates that control the majority of the global music industry. We're talking about a corporation with billions in revenue, teams of lawyers, and decades of experience in structuring deals that look generous on the surface but are designed to keep artists in debt indefinitely. The Atlantic playbook for signing street rappers is formulaic. First, they identify artists who are already building momentum independently.
I don't like to see a lot of internet stuff.
Reducing their risk because they're not gambling on unproven talent. Second, they approach these artists at their most vulnerable moments. Third, they present contracts that are deliberately complex and overwhelming. When Atlantic approached NBA Youngboy in 2017, they followed this playbook perfectly. Here was a 17-year-old kid who had proven he could create music that connected with audiences, who was dealing with legal issues requiring expensive representation, and who was supporting multiple family members on inconsistent income. The offer they presented was reportedly worth several $1 million. To put that in perspective, that's more money than most people in Baton Rouge see in their entire lifetimes. For a teenager who had been worried about basic survival, this seemed like winning the lottery. But here's where the finesse begins. That several $1 million wasn't actually cash. It was an advance against future earnings, essentially a loan that Youngboy would have to pay back.
It just came about, but that ain't actually just mine.
Through his music sales, streaming revenue, and touring income. The contract structure gave him around 15 to 20% of his music royalties, with Atlantic keeping 80 to 85%. Atlantic also controlled his publishing, distribution, marketing budget, and essentially every aspect of his career. Let me break down the real math. Over his Atlantic contract, NBA Youngboy generated billions of streams. His YouTube channel alone accumulated over 10 billion views. Industry experts estimate that an artist of his caliber should be earning 3 to 5 cents per stream. With total streams likely exceeding 15 billion, the revenue generated from streaming alone would...
Just the music industry, being famous.
I wouldn't blame it on the industry. It's all about how you go about it, and I'm not that strong.
Probably $45 to $75 million. Add touring, merchandise, and publishing, and the total value easily exceeds $300 million. Yet Youngboy was struggling financially throughout most of his Atlantic tenure. How? Every dollar Atlantic spent on him, studio time, music videos, marketing campaigns, was charged against his account. He had to recoup all expenses before seeing additional money beyond his initial advance. Studio time that cost independent artists hundreds became thousands charged to his account. Music videos that independents shot for $5,000 to $10,000 cost $50,000 to $100,000, with Atlantic using preferred vendors at inflated rates. This system creates perverse incentives where labels benefit from keeping artists in debt. As long as Youngboy owed money, Atlantic kept the majority of his earnings. After signing with Atlantic in 2017, Youngboy's career changed dramatically. His mixtape AI Youngboy performed well commercially, and Atlantic's promotional machine got him playlist placements and radio spins impossible to secure independently. But behind the scenes, problems emerged immediately. His organic creative process now involved multiple approval layers. A&Rs wanted input on song selection, marketing teams controlled release timing, and executives made decisions about presenting his authentic experiences to mainstream audiences. More concerning was the financial reality.
I think I need help. I got an anger problem.
Despite strong performance and growing streaming numbers, Youngboy wasn't seeing expected money. He was still working off that initial advance, with every Atlantic expense deducted from future earnings. By 2018, the disconnect between commercial success and personal finances became impossible to ignore. Until Death Call My Name debuted at number 7 on Billboard 200. His YouTube consistently generated millions of views. His touring sold out venues nationwide. Yet Youngboy lived modestly compared to other artists with similar success. While Atlantic label mates posted about luxury purchases, he focused on basic financial security. This wasn't responsibility. He wasn't receiving the money his success should have generated. The breaking point came when Youngboy researched streaming payouts and industry standards. He realized just how badly he was being exploited. By 2019, NBA Youngboy consistently outperformed artists considered much bigger mainstream stars on YouTube. Industry analysts estimate artists generating his streaming activity should earn $10 to $15 million annually from music alone. Yet he was seeing a fraction of that amount. Atlantic's contract structure meant the vast majority of earnings went directly to the label. Because Atlantic controlled his release schedule, they could throttle his earning potential by limiting music output. Youngboy's work ethic became both blessing and curse. He was naturally prolific, capable of recording multiple songs daily, but Atlantic wanted to control release pace to maximize promotional impact and avoid market oversaturation. The tension reached a boiling point in 2019 when Youngboy began expressing frustration publicly. He started making comments about feeling restricted and wanting more creative control. Atlantic tried to manage his public statements and control his narrative. They reminded him of contractual obligations and potential consequences of speaking negatively about the label. But Youngboy wasn't built to stay quiet about injustice. Authenticity was core to who he was. Being told to suppress honest feelings about his business situation went against everything that made him successful. In late 2020, NBA Youngboy reached his breaking point. After years of watching his music generate massive revenue while seeing minimal financial benefit, he decided to tell the truth.
10 years old, North Baton Rouge, Chippewa 38th Street, growing up in Louisiana City.
The explosion came through Instagram, where he had built direct connection with his fan base. In a series of posts, he didn't just criticize Atlantic Records, he completely exposed their business model and warned other young artists. The most damaging statement: don't sign to Atlantic unless you want to be a slave. That word choice, slave, wasn't accidental. Youngboy was making a deliberate comparison between Atlantic's contract structure and historical exploitation systems. Despite appearance of wealth and success, he felt trapped in a system where his labor generated massive profits for others while he remained financially dependent. He claimed Atlantic was making far more money from his music than he was, despite him being the creative force. He suggested the label's promotional promises had been largely empty, and his success was primarily due to his own work ethic and direct fan connection. Most explosive was his allegation about the financial structure itself. Youngboy implied Atlantic's business model was designed to keep artists in debt indefinitely, working constantly to pay back advances while the label collected majority revenue. He broke down exploitation mathematics in terms his young audience could understand. He explained how advances work, why recoupment keeps artists in debt, and how labels use expenses to reduce artist earnings. These weren't vague complaints. This was direct attack on Atlantic's core business model, delivered by one of their most successful artists to millions of young, aspiring musicians who looked up to him. The impact was immediate and devastating. Youngboy's fan base was incredibly loyal. When he told them not to sign with Atlantic, they listened. The posts went viral within hours. Hip-hop blogs, industry publications, and mainstream media picked up the story. Atlantic found themselves defending their business practices publicly, something major labels typically avoid. Other artists in similar situations began paying attention. Youngboy's willingness to speak out gave voice to frustrations many felt but were afraid to express due to contractual restrictions or retaliation fears.
Young boy never broke again, and I'm gonna tell you exactly who I am.
Over following weeks, he continued elaborating. He talked about feeling like creative output was artificially limited to serve label financial interests rather than artistic vision. He described working constantly but never getting ahead financially. Most damaging, he began breaking down actual numbers for followers. He explained streaming generation versus actual money received, how advanced systems worked, and why artists could be commercially successful while remaining financially struggling. This transparency was unprecedented. Major label artists don't discuss contract specifics publicly, but Youngboy was focused on warning other young artists about what they were really signing up for. The educational aspect was particularly threatening to Atlantic. Youngboy was systematically explaining how major label exploitation works, giving other artists knowledge to protect themselves. His posts included specific advice: get your own lawyer, don't trust the label's legal team, understand cross-collateralization, calculate potential earnings independently, and don't let desperation make you accept the first offer. This wasn't just an artist having a public meltdown. This was a masterclass in music industry economics delivered to exactly the demographic Atlantic depends on: young, hungry artists from disadvantaged backgrounds vulnerable to predatory contracts. After Youngboy's explosive post, Atlantic faced a choice: address his concerns or make an example of him. They chose the latter, implementing a systematic campaign to sabotage his career as warning to other artists. The blackballing wasn't obvious. Major labels are too sophisticated for crude retaliation. Instead, it was subtle, coordinated effort to limit his success while maintaining plausible deniability. First, promotional support mysteriously diminished. Before criticism, Youngboy's releases received standard major label treatment: playlist placements, radio promotion, social media campaigns, and streaming platform coordination. After his posts, new releases weren't getting same playlist placement levels. Radio promotion became inconsistent. Social media campaigns were scaled back or eliminated. Music videos weren't promoted as aggressively across Atlantic's industry network. Atlantic would argue these changes were based on performance metrics, but timing was too convenient. Youngboy's fan base engagement hadn't decreased.
And it's like, they'll have their favorite rapper, and this person fuck around and do something like just show off.
His willingness to speak truth had strengthened his core audience connection. Streaming numbers remained strong. YouTube views continued growing organically. But organic success can only take an artist so far when fighting against industry machinery designed to control which artists achieve mainstream breakthrough. Most insidious was how they manipulated chart performance. Chart positions aren't just about sales and streams, they're about which sales get counted and how they're weighted. Major labels have relationships with chart compilers like Billboard that allow them to influence how artists' performance gets measured. They can choose which song versions to promote, structure release strategies for maximum chart impact, and coordinate promotional pushes. For compliant artists, labels use these relationships to boost chart performance. For rebellious artists, they do the opposite: structure releases to minimize chart impact or simply not implement promotional strategies that would maximize performance. Despite maintaining strong streaming numbers and fan engagement, Youngboy's chart performance began suffering in ways that didn't align with his actual popularity. The impact extended beyond chart positions. Award show nominations became scarce. Television performance opportunities dried up. Collaboration opportunities with other major label artists were discouraged or blocked. Atlantic was using industry influence to create artificial ceiling on Youngboy's success. They couldn't stop his core fan base support, but they could prevent him from reaching broader mainstream audiences that would translate to significantly higher earnings.
Man, I don't know. Like,
If he wants the hat, he can take the
man,
hat.
Jason is dude.
Let him take the hat.
Most damaging was how this affected his relationship with streaming platforms. Major labels negotiate terms under which artists' music appears on platforms, including promotional placement, algorithmic boosting, and featured positioning. When Atlantic decided to retaliate, they began negotiating less favorable terms for his music. His songs weren't getting same algorithmic promotion levels. His music wasn't featured as prominently in platform-curated playlists. His content wasn't recommended as aggressively to potential new fans. This created vicious cycles where reduced platform support led to slower new fan acquisition growth, which Atlantic could point to as justification for further reducing promotional support. But Atlantic's Retaliation served a purpose beyond punishing Youngboy. It was a message to every other artist on their roster. The subtext was clear. This is what happens when you criticize the label publicly. Other Atlantic artists were watching, and the message was received. Speaking out wasn't just career suicide, it was guaranteed path to industry exile. The most frustrating aspect for Youngboy was that his music quality never declined. If anything, adversity made him more focused and creative. His work ethic remained incredible, his core fan base connection grew stronger, and artistic output continued being prolific and authentic. But none of that mattered when fighting against coordinated industry effort to limit success. Chapter 6, The Grind Continues. What makes Youngboy's story remarkable is how he responded to Atlantic's systematic sabotage. Instead of being broken by industry retaliation, he outworked the sabotage. Throughout 2021 and 2022, while Atlantic actively limited promotional support, Youngboy maintained incredible creative output pace. He was releasing projects consistently, often surprising fans with new music unexpectedly.
I don't know how to play.
You don't know how to play, so you just gonna be bench warming?
Yep.
But this wasn't just quantity. Quality remained consistently high. Songs like White Teeth, Nevada, and House Arrest Tings showed an artist channeling frustration and adversity into increasingly sophisticated music. What Atlantic hadn't anticipated was how their retaliation would strengthen Youngboy's core fanbase connection. His supporters weren't casual listeners who could be swayed by reduced radio play. They were deeply invested in his story and struggle against industry exploitation. When fans saw his music wasn't getting same promotional treatment as other Atlantic artists, they compensated themselves. They streamed more intensively, shared more aggressively on social media, and created their own promotional campaigns. This organic fan support created interesting dynamics where Youngboy's commercial performance remained strong despite Atlantic's reduced efforts. YouTube views continued climbing, streaming numbers stayed competitive, and touring continued selling well. He was succeeding in spite of his label rather than because of them. But financial impact of Atlantic's retaliation was still significant. Reduced promotional support meant slower new fan acquisition growth, fewer collaboration opportunities, and limited mainstream recognition. Most importantly, artificial constraints on success were costing him money directly. Every stream he didn't get due to reduced playlist placement, every fan he didn't acquire due to limited promotional reach, all represented lost revenue. The situation created perverse dynamics where Atlantic was sabotaging their own financial interests to make points about artist compliance. They were willing to sacrifice potential profits from one of their most successful artists to maintain authority and discourage other artists from similar rebellion. Throughout this period, Youngboy continued being vocal about his situation, though he became more strategic. Rather than explosive social media posts, he began incorporating industry criticism into his music itself. This approach was particularly effective because it was harder for Atlantic to retaliate against. They couldn't prevent him from expressing views in music without violating creative freedom. The educational aspect of his music during this period was remarkable. He was conducting masterclass in music industry economics through songs, explaining concepts like recoupment, cross-collateralization, and promotional manipulation in terms his young audience could understand. This wasn't just artistic expression, it was activism. Youngboy was using his platform to protect other artists from same exploitation he experienced. But most significant development was Youngboy's growing focus on contractual obligations and timeline. He understood the only real escape from Atlantic's control was fulfilling contract requirements and regaining freedom. This created interesting motivation dynamics where his desire for freedom drove even higher productivity levels. He wasn't just working to satisfy Atlantic's requirements, he was working to accelerate his path to independence. By late 2022, it was becoming clear that Youngboy's Atlantic contract was approaching its end. Industry observers began speculating about what would happen next. By mid to late 2022, NBA Youngboy was finally approaching contractual freedom. The completion of his Atlantic contract was testament to incredible work ethic and resilience. Despite facing industry retaliation and reduced promotional support, he had delivered every project and fulfilled every obligation. But Atlantic wasn't ready to let him go without a fight. As contract expiration approached, they began a retention campaign, attempting to convince him to re-sign under new terms addressing some previous concerns while keeping him within their corporate structure. The offer they presented was reportedly in the $25 million range, a significant increase reflecting both his proven commercial success and Atlantic's desperation to retain one of their most valuable assets. On paper, it looked like substantial improvement over previous contract terms. The advance was larger, royalty percentages slightly better, and there were provisions for increased creative input on marketing strategies. But Youngboy had learned too much about the music industry to be impressed by large advance numbers. He understood real value of any record deal isn't in upfront money. It's in ongoing revenue splits, creative control provisions, and long-term financial structure. More importantly, he had experienced firsthand what happens when major label artists step out of line. He had seen how Atlantic was willing to sabotage their own financial interests to maintain control. Why would he trust them not to retaliate again if future disagreements arose? The $25 million offer, while substantial, came with same fundamental problems that made his original deal exploitative. Atlantic would still control majority of his revenue streams. They would still have final say over release schedule and promotional strategy. Most critically, re-signing with Atlantic would validate their Retaliation campaign and send message to other artists that speaking out against label exploitation ultimately doesn't matter. Youngboy's rejection of Atlantic's re-signing offer was about more than business terms. It was statement about artistic integrity and personal dignity. He was choosing potential financial uncertainty over guaranteed exploitation. The decision also reflected his understanding of how the music industry had changed during his Atlantic years. Streaming platforms had democratized music distribution somewhat. Social media had created direct artist-to-fan communication channels. Most importantly, Youngboy had built something more valuable than any contract, a deeply loyal fan base that would support him regardless of label situation. Atlantic's failed retention attempt revealed several important things. First, it showed their Retaliation campaign had been counterproductive from pure business perspective. They had spent years undermining one of their most successful artists, only to offer significantly more money to stay, essentially admitting previous treatment had been unfair. Second, it demonstrated that major labels view artist relationships as fundamentally transactional. Atlantic's approach wasn't to apologize for previous behavior, it was simply to offer more money and hope that would maintain compliance. Third, it revealed how much financial value Youngboy represented. The $25 million offer wasn't just about retaining future music, it was about preventing him from proving major label artists could succeed independently. When NBA Youngboy walked away from Atlantic and their $25 million offer, he was conducting an experiment. Could an artist systematically sabotaged by a major label maintain commercial success independently? The stakes couldn't have been higher. If Youngboy failed to maintain commercial momentum without Atlantic's resources, it would validate the major label system. But if he succeeded, it would demonstrate that major labels' control over artists' careers was more about maintaining power structures than providing irreplaceable value. The first challenge was distribution. Youngboy needed distribution partners who could get his music onto all major platforms without promotional disadvantages. The solution came through strategic partnerships with independent distribution companies specializing in hip-hop that had platform relationships but weren't beholden to major label politics. These partnerships allowed him to maintain control while accessing technical infrastructure needed for global distribution. More importantly, these partnerships didn't come with exploitative financial terms. Instead of giving up 80 to 85% of revenue, Youngboy could retain majority earnings while paying reasonable fees for specific services. The second challenge was promotion. Youngboy's approach was doubling down on direct artist-to-fan connection that had sustained him throughout Atlantic's sabotage. Rather than trying to replicate major label promotional strategies, he focused on channels where his fan relationship was strongest: YouTube, social media, and live performance. His YouTube strategy was particularly sophisticated. Instead of relying on platform promotion, he focused on creating content his existing fan base would engage with intensively. High engagement rates from core audience would signal to YouTube's algorithm that his content was valuable, leading to broader organic promotion. The approach worked remarkably well. His first independent releases generated millions of views within days, often outperforming major label artists with significantly larger promotional budgets. The financial results were remarkable. Without Atlantic taking 80 to 85% of revenue, Youngboy could retain majority of streaming income, merchandise sales, and touring profits. Industry analysts estimated his per-stream earnings increased by 300 to 400% compared to his Atlantic deal. But most important validation came from streaming numbers and chart performance. Despite predictions he would struggle without major label support, his independent releases consistently performed well commercially. Songs like his independent releases were proving major label promotional machinery, while helpful, wasn't essential for commercial success. Quality music combined with authentic fan relationships could generate substantial commercial results without corporate intermediaries taking majority profits. The success of his independent experiment began attracting attention from other artists dealing with similar major label frustrations. Most importantly, other Atlantic artists were watching closely. Atlantic, meanwhile, was dealing with uncomfortable reality that their former artist was proving their business model wasn't as essential as they claimed. Every successful independent release from Youngboy was essentially case study in how artists could bypass major label control while maintaining commercial viability. NBA Youngboy's successful transition to independence fundamentally changed the conversation about artist rights and major label necessity throughout the hip-hop industry and beyond. The ripple effects began immediately. Other artists started publicly referencing Youngboy's example when discussing their own contract frustrations. His willingness to walk away from guaranteed money in favor of independence became talking point in industry circles. More significantly, his financial success as independent artist provided concrete evidence that major label resources, while valuable, weren't worth exploitative terms that typically came with them. The educational impact was particularly important. Throughout his Atlantic years and transition to independence, Youngboy had been consistently transparent about business realities he was experiencing. His willingness to discuss contract terms, revenue splits, and industry manipulation had created a generation of more informed artists and fans. Young artists who might have previously signed the first major label deal offered were now asking more sophisticated questions about contract terms, recoupment structures, and long-term financial implications. Legal experts and artist advocates began using his case as example when discussing need for industry reform. His experience demonstrated how major label contracts could be structured to appear generous while actually being exploitative. But most significant impact was on other Atlantic Records artists. Youngboy's success had proven that labels' retaliation tactics, while damaging, weren't career-ending for artists with strong fan relationships and business acumen. Several Atlantic artists began making more subtle references to contract frustrations in their music and interviews. The increased willingness to discuss business issues publicly represented shift in traditional power dynamic between artists and labels. Atlantic found themselves dealing with more educated and assertive roster of artists who were aware of alternative options and less willing to accept exploitative terms without question. Other major labels were experiencing similar pressures. Universal Music Group, Sony Music Entertainment, and their subsidiaries all had to contend with artists who were more aware of industry alternatives. Independent distribution companies began marketing their services more aggressively to major label artists, using Youngboy's success as case study for how artists could maintain commercial viability while retaining control. But perhaps most important long-term impact was cultural. Youngboy's journey from exploitation to independence became symbol of artistic integrity and business acumen within hip-hop culture. This cultural shift influenced how success was measured within hip-hop communities. Financial independence and artistic control became markers of achievement alongside traditional metrics like chart positions and award nominations. The regulatory environment also began shifting as lawmakers and industry oversight bodies became more aware of exploitative contract practices. Youngboy's public criticism contributed to broader discussions about need for industry reform and artist protection. NBA Youngboy's battle with Atlantic Records represents more than one artist's struggle against an exploitative contract. His story illuminates fundamental power structures that have controlled the music industry for decades and demonstrates how those structures are beginning to crack. The numbers tell the story clearly. Over his Atlantic contract, Youngboy generated what industry experts estimate to be over $300 million in total revenue. Yet he saw only small fraction due to Atlantic's contract structure and business practices. This massive disparity between value creation and compensation isn't unique to Youngboy. It's standard operating procedure for major record labels dealing with artists from disadvantaged backgrounds. What made Youngboy's situation unique wasn't the exploitation, it was his willingness to speak out publicly and his eventual success in breaking free. His journey provides roadmap other artists can follow, but more importantly, exposes mechanisms of industry exploitation in ways that make them harder to ignore. The educational impact cannot be overstated. By breaking down real economics of his Atlantic deal, Youngboy provided masterclass in music industry business that reached millions of aspiring artists. This education has made it significantly harder for labels to exploit artist ignorance in future negotiations. The retaliation he faced also exposed how major labels maintain power through fear and industry manipulation. Atlantic's systematic sabotage demonstrated these companies are willing to sacrifice their own financial interests to maintain control. But perhaps most importantly, his successful transition to independence proved major label resources, while valuable, aren't worth exploitative terms that typically come with them. The broader implications are profound. If successful artists can walk away from major label deals and maintain careers independently, the entire foundation of current system becomes questionable. This question is already influencing contract negotiations throughout industry. Labels are being forced to offer better terms and provide more genuine value to compete with independent alternatives. But the story also reveals limitations of individual rebellion against systemic exploitation. While Youngboy escaped Atlantic's control, he had to sacrifice years of potential earnings and endure systematic sabotage. Not every artist has fan-base loyalty, business acumen, or financial resources necessary to survive such retaliation. This is why his story is ultimately about more than individual success. It's about need for systemic change in how music industry operates. The cultural impact extends beyond just music industry. Youngboy's willingness to sacrifice guaranteed money for principle resonated with audiences who value authenticity and self-determination. But perhaps most important lesson is about power of truth-telling. His willingness to speak honestly about his experiences despite personal and professional costs created change that extended far beyond his individual situation. The music industry tried to silence him through retaliation and financial pressure, but his commitment to honesty ultimately proved more powerful than their attempts at control. As we look toward future of music industry, NBA Youngboy's battle with Atlantic Records will be remembered as turning point, moment when artists' refusal to accept exploitation helped expose and challenge systems that have controlled industry for decades. His story demonstrates that speaking truth to power, while costly in short term, can create lasting change that benefits entire communities of artists and creators. The choice is ours, as artists, as fans, as industry participants, and as society that values creativity and fair compensation for creative work. NBA Youngboy showed us what's possible when artists refuse to accept exploitation and fight for their rights. Now it's up to all of us to build on his example and create industry that truly serves the artists who make it possible. That's the real story of how Atlantic Records tried to finesse NBA Youngboy out of $300 million, and how his refusal to stay silent exposed the dark reality of major label exploitation. This isn't just about one artist or one label, it's about an entire system built on keeping creators financially dependent while corporate executives get rich off their talent. If you're an aspiring artist watching this, take notes. Understand what you're really signing when you put your name on that contract. Get your own lawyer, educate yourself about industry economics, and remember that no amount of money is worth your artistic integrity or long-term financial freedom. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, because we're going to keep exposing these industry secrets that they don't want you to know about. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand how the music business really works. Until next time, this is your boy Hip Hop History, and remember, the truth always comes out eventually. Peace. Eventually.